Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni maliwanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the crowded Mattress Studios in the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville. We are so honored and so very excited that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. And please be sure to tell your kids' teachers, principals, and librarians. And please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Lori Orlinsky. She's returning to the show to celebrate the adventures of Lefty and Righty in the Windy City. Before we invite our friend Lori back into the studio, we want to let you know that we are looking for a few amazing classrooms throughout the country to help us interview authors. That's right, we're starting a new chapter in the Reading with Your Kids podcast where we are inviting young people to come on and help us interview select authors for the show. It's going to be an awful lot of fun. It's a great learning experience for kids. It doesn't cost a thing. All you need to do is to contact me directly, jedlie@jedlie.com. That's Jedlie @jedlie.com. We'll connect via Zoom and take it from there. It's going to be a lot of fun. Give your kids a chance to meet some great authors, learn about some great books, and be heard all around the world. Join us right now from the beautiful Windy City of Chicago. Our guest is one of our favorite guests of all time. She's returning to the show to celebrate her brand new picture book. It's called The Adventures of Lefty and Righty in the Windy City. Please welcome back to the show, Lori Orlinsky. Hey, Lori, how are you?
Hey, Jed. Thanks for having me. We're just saying like fourth or fifth time. I hope this one's a charm.
Absolutely. I'm really excited. Now, the Adventures of Lefty and Righty in the Windy City, it just released, and not only did it just release at like the top of the Amazon charts in a bunch of different categories, right?
It did, yes. It's got for family travel, Chicago, Illinois books, city life books. It's definitely been a fun and exciting week for me.
I bet. Now, this is book number 4 for you, am I right?
Correct.
Book number 4, and we've celebrated all the other books, and I can't wait for you to tell us what The Adventures of Lefty and Righty in the Windy City is all about.
So this book, I'm sure that we can all relate. Anybody that's ever sat and did laundry and had to fold laundry, that horrible task. We can never find any matches to our socks. I don't care if you're a parent, if you're single, if you're married, you cannot find pairs of socks that match. It's just physically impossible. And I just wondered out loud, where do these socks go? And I said it, and my daughter Ellie, who's now 7, she was probably about 4 at the time, just looked at me very innocently and said, "Mommy, they're at the White Sox game." And we got a good chuckle out of that because what she meant by that was they're socks, so they're going to a Sox game. And we loved how it was so literal, and I thought this could be a good way to teach kids about the city of Chicago.
And Chicago is a really fantastic city, but it's really big. There's a lot going on there.
Yes, there is. And so I tried, with the premise of this book is these 2 socks, Lefty and Righty, they escape from the dryer and they find like a ticket, a White Sox ticket. And so they decide to put it in their pocket and they take the L, which is a really big highlight of the city. They get a Chicago style hot dog. They go to all the favorite places of my children. So it's kind of like little Easter eggs hidden throughout there. They go see the reflection in the bean. They ride on the Ferris wheel, and throughout the story, I have certain words that are bolded. For example, people might not know, if you're not from Chicago, what is the bean? And so at the end of the story, there's a glossary that relates to those bolded words, and it says exactly what the bean is, where it is, and it's a little history lesson at the end.
Now, you and I and your daughters, your first two daughters at the time, spent a lot of time and had a lot of fun at a particular part of Chicago that I was referring to as the Navy Pier. And then you told me that, dude, no one says the Navy Pier. It's Navy Pier. And so, do we visit Navy Pier?
We do visit Navy Pier. That's where we ride. We actually take a water taxi to Navy Pier, and water taxis are so much fun. I literally have spent the whole day with my kids just going from stop to stop with no destination in mind because it's a fun way to see the city from the water. And they go on the Ferris wheel. They do all of the fun stuff. But yes, the cool kids these days just say Navy Pier.
Well, I stood corrected back then. I don't think I've made that mistake since then. You know, one of the things that we did, my beautiful wife and I, when we visited Chicago for my cousin's wedding, is we took that architect's boat ride where we went through the rivers to see all the amazing architecture in downtown. Do we explore a little bit about of that architecture in this book?
We don't go too much into the architecture. I talk about some of the places and the neighborhoods, but that's actually a great idea for a book. I love the architecture is so pretty, and the tour that you're talking about is so fun. They have some fun drinks for the adults, and there's some fun stops for the kids as well.
Yeah, really. So instead of me asking about all these places, or the few places that I know about Chicago, tell us the different places that we haven't talked about that the book takes us to.
Well, one thing about Chicago, Chicago-style hot dogs are a big thing. A lot of people talk about the deep dish pizza, which is great, but Chicago-style hot dogs are really the hero in the city. And so Lefty and Righty eat this big, giant hot dog, and it's topped with everything Chicagoans like. So it's topped with chopped onions, relish, pickles, hot peppers, mustard, and of course, Chicagoans never put ketchup on hot dogs. It's like a thing. You cannot do it. You will probably be kicked out of our city. There's actually, on the highway, there's different ads that say, do not drink and drive and things like that. And occasionally they'll throw in one for just a little lightheartedness. It says, never put ketchup on hot dogs. And they'll just throw that in there. So Chicagoans not wear their seatbelt. Chicagoans don't ever drink and drive. Chicagoans don't ever put ketchup on hot dogs.
You know, I must have a little Chicago in me because I have never in my life put ketchup on a hot dog, and I don't understand why anybody would.
Well, I'm glad you have to come visit then. And in addition to the hot dogs, they go to the Field Museum, which is the Museum of Natural History, and they pose by this giant T-Rex dinosaur. They take some selfies. We talked about the Ferris wheel. They go see the Bean at Millennium Park. One of my personal favorites is they go to Willis Tower, which is formerly the Sears Tower, and they have a sky deck that's 103 floors up, and you can actually step out and see the city with a glass bottom and glass all around you, so it looks kind of like you're floating. And they get to do that, and I'll actually be even reading the book and doing an author signing at the Willis Tower. So it'll be pretty cool to be at some of those places that Lefty and Righty go.
That will be an awful lot of fun.
It will. And of course, I couldn't do this book without working with the White Sox as well. We're huge White Sox fans in my family. We live on the northwest side of Chicago, so we should be Cubs fans, but we're not. But I do nod to the Cubs in the book because the game that they're playing is called the Crosstown Classic. So it's a game that's played between the Cubs and the Sox. So if you're a Cubs fan, it's still a book for you.
So how in the world did that happen? You're living in the wrong part of town for the love of baseball.
I married into it. My husband has always been a Sox fan. And so we even at our wedding, when they introduced us as husband and wife for the first time, we had Sox jackets and jerseys, and we came out to the theme song. And it's been a huge part of my life since I met him.
You know, it's hard for me to imagine being in a sports crazy town like Boston, which is like Chicago. We just love our teams. But I can't imagine having to choose which team to have. You know, we have the Red Sox here, but we don't have a rival hometown baseball team or basketball team. So what's that like growing up where, you know, the city's kind of divided?
It's definitely fun. You know, you always have, it's not a true like mean rival, but it's kind of like a nice fun banter. People always joke. There are some people in Chicago that are like, I love Chicago, all Chicago teams. And we say those aren't real Chicagoans because you really pick one or the other. You can't just be a fair weather fan. You can't just be a fan of both. You have to root for one. But having said that, it was really excited a few years ago when the Cubs won the World Series. It was just exciting for our city. They hadn't done it in a long time. I think they broke that curse. So, and I think Cubs fans probably felt the same when the Sox won back in 2005.
Yeah. Lori, you shared with us on your first visit that, you know, you didn't set out in life to become a children's author. You wrote your first book, Being Small, because of your daughter, my buddy Haley, and what she was going through.
Yes, Haley is now, gosh, I can't believe it. She's 10 and she's in 4th grade. And when she was 3 years old, she had come home from school one day really upset because her classroom had done an activity. They did a growth chart and all of Haley's friends' names were at the top and the middle of the chart. And there was poor Haley's name in masking tape at the very bottom by the doorstop. And she was kind of getting made fun of a little bit. People were calling her Shorty and Peanut. And my career has always been in marketing and writing. So I write for a lot of different publications, but more recreationally and just do it as I have time. And marketing, there's some of my background is in marketing for large attractions in Chicago. But I just decided, let me write her a book because I couldn't find a book about short kids. And I wrote it for her. I read it for her and kind of just decided at the push of my husband and everyone else in my family to try and get it published. And that is how my career as an author took off. I didn't intend to be a children's book author. I think it's a bucket list thing I always wanted to do, but I was never inspired to. I never had that big idea until it just came to me with Haley. And that's how all of my other books have gone. They've all been inspired somehow by my own children.
Yeah. And this wasn't like a bucket list thing where you just checked the box and said, okay, done that. You've really dove right into this where, you know, you are a children's author right now. And when I say that, I don't mean that you're just writing children's books. You have embraced the fact that being a children's author means that you are the CEO of a small business, of your children's book business. And you've done amazing things with your books.
Thank you. I never set out to be on this path, but I'm so grateful that I am. I love going into schools. It's one of my favorite things to do, going into schools and libraries and reading the books, talking to kids about persistence, because a big part of being an author was persisting. When I originally wrote Being Small, I must have sent it out to 200 or 300 agents and publishers, and almost all of them said no, except for 1 or 2. So it's about persistence. So I love being able, especially after COVID, to be able to reconnect with kids. COVID did allow me to connect with kids all over the world virtually and do these virtual author visits, which I still do. But there's something about being in person with these kids and watching their faces light up when you talk to them about what it's like to write a story and you listen to their ideas. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun being with kids. And just, I was always amazed when I am doing my educational magic show and asking kids if they have any questions. Sometimes the questions they have about a book or about a trick that I do, it lets you know that they are seeing things in a completely different way than you are seeing your story or your trick or illusion. Have there been any kind of observations that kids have shared with you about your books that really surprised you?
I think particularly Being Small. I originally just wrote it for kids that are short. So they will have a resource and say, this is how I can flip the switch and change the narrative and see how being short is beneficial for me. And I noticed that whether you were short, tall, had freckles, kids were taking this book and embracing the overall message, which really wasn't about being short or tall. It was about loving yourself for who you are and not bullying. And so that was really surprising to me. I have worked with the National Bullying Prevention Center, and since then I've gotten some certification in bullying prevention and response training. So people do resonate with that book, just in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's still the issue of bullying. It's something that it took us a long while as a society to kind of recognize that this is a problem. And then kind of everybody jumped on the bandwagon for about 10 years or so, and then kind of like, okay, well, let's move on to something different. But I think it's really important for us to all remember that the issue of bullying, it's an ongoing issue. It's always, I would love to think that we could eliminate it, but it's not possible to eliminate bullying, but we can respond to it and support kids who are being targeted, and also support the kids who are being bullies, and give them the support that they need to deal with whatever issue it is that's driving them to hurt others.
Right. And I'm a big proponent of lesson-based learning through books. I think instead of sitting kids down and saying, listen, we need to talk about bullying, we need to talk about lying, we need to talk about some of these important issues I see going around, kids automatically get on the defense. It becomes an awkward conversation. So I think as a writer, what I like to do is illustrate those concepts through a book, and then talk to kids about the choices that the characters in the book made. And they're actually having a nice interactive lesson and discussion around bullying, but they don't explicitly know it. And so that's what I've done with my books ever since being small. I've tried to teach kids the hard and difficult lessons of life, with the exception of Lefty and Righty. That's just more of a fun one, but through children's books.
Well, in Lefty and Righty, they do have to kind of address a difficult choice, being a Cubs fan or a White Sox fan.
They do, and whether to put ketchup on their hot dog and get thrown out of the city or not.
Yeah. Hey, one of the things I just wanted to mention, because it was such an amazing accomplishment, is during COVID, your family didn't just sit back and say, okay, we're just going to wait for this to happen. Your daughter, Haley, who is a buddy of mine, I've had the chance of being on stage with her, reading, being small together here on the podcast, and just spending time with. She went out and she raised a ton of money for kids in need.
She did. It was a pretty awesome thing to do under not so awesome circumstances. She had been listening to the news very early on in March 2020 and overheard that the Children's Hospital in Chicago, where she was born, was in need of masks and PPE. And she ran upstairs, and she had been making these bracelets that her friend taught her to make on Zoom. And she ran upstairs and grabbed a couple of them and kind of put them in my hand. She was about 6 at the time. She was in first grade, and said, what if I sell these bracelets and I'll make money for the hospital and they can buy masks and PPE? And I thought that was a great idea. I thought, she'll probably make $20 or $30. It's a nice lesson for her, and it'll keep her busy. And it just spread like wildfire. She ended up selling, I want to say, over 16,000 bracelets and making over $55,000 for the hospital. So it was a beautiful, beautiful family project. Not only did she get to raise money for masks and PPE, but it also helped to bring vaccines to Chicago and distribute the vaccines in low-income areas.
Yeah. What a tremendous accomplishment. I am so very proud of her, and so proud to have been able to spend some time with her. What a great kid. Tell me, Laurie, what's next for you?
Well, maybe you can tell me, because everyone says now you have to write a story about Sox that get lost in Boston, and they're on their way to a Red Sox game. So maybe that's a fun collaboration for us, because I've only been to Boston once.
Well, I would be delighted to do that. There are so many great things to do here in Boston. Of course, visit Faneuil Hall and all of the historic places. And you'll probably find some people who put ketchup on their hot dogs, unfortunately.
And, being a mom of 3 girls, one of which is only a year old, I've realized that raising a middle child is very, very different than anything in the world. And so there are not that many resources for middle kids in terms of books. So I might write a fun book about my middle child, Ellie's antics. She is definitely, out of all my kids, she is hilarious. She's the one who inspired this book. And I think a book about being a middle child inspired by her would be great.
And I like the title, Ellie's Antics. The first one, the title that came to mind is, How Do I Not Kill This Kid? I don't think that would sell.
I guess in the olden days, they used to call kids that were being naughty mixers. So some people in my family call her the little mixer.
Ah, okay. I never heard that, but I like it. Hey, one last thing before we go. You've obviously embraced this idea that in the reality that you are the CEO of your book business, and thankfully you have a lot of marketing experience behind you and knowledge that typically a first-time children's book author, especially a self-published or indie author, doesn't have, and you're sharing some of your wisdom and knowledge with those folks.
I am. So I'm really active on all the different Facebook communities where people are asking questions and sharing experiences. And during the pandemic, another amazing thing to come out of this negative experience was I had teamed up with another author who I knew, Allison Bork, who is the creator of the Alley Cat series, actually one of my kids' favorite of all time series. And we started up a little podcast to bring author visits to kids that were learning virtually. And through that, we got to talking about marketing with authors, and we had a lot of people message us, ask us to help us market their books. And we just one day decided, let's try to make this a business. And so we now have a company together called Forward Publicity, and we work with authors of all different genres and all different publishing routes. And we help them not only launch their book, but sustain that momentum. And so we are proud to have worked with over 300 authors in almost 3 years.
That's amazing. That really is amazing. Lori, there's so much going on in your life and in your book career and your company with Allie. Tell everybody where they can go to find out not only more about your books, but also more about how you can help an author become more successful.
You can find out about my books at LoriOrlinskyAuthor.com. You can also find my books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And locally, they're available in almost every store in Chicago. And then you can find out more about Forward Publicity and how we might be able to help you at forwardpublicity.com.
And are we going to find the books in Kaminsky Park?
So, yes, they will be in Comiskey Park. They'll be in the nursing room for now and the sensory room. So when parents are kind of needing a little bit of a break from the hustle and bustle of the game, it's a nice kind of kids place that's low. They can check that out. And I'll actually be at Guaranteed Rate Field reading my book on April 16th. And one thing I wanted to mention as well is a portion of proceeds from the sale of the book will benefit White Sox charities. And White Sox Charities is very big on youth education and literacy. So it's really the perfect partnership.
Yeah, sounds like it. We've had a great time speaking to the author of The Adventures of Lefty and Righty in the Windy City. Our guest has been our buddy, Lori Orlinsky. Hey, Lori, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you again for having me, and I hope next time we're doing a podcast together about our collaboration at Boston.
Sounds great. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and we hope you will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. Until then, we want to thank the folks who made this show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Lori Orlinsky. Please be sure to check out The Adventures of Lefty and Righty in the Windy City. I also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Jordan Saley, Will Cheever, Cassandra Masonet, Stephanie Davila. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking to the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.